Welcome. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to do the inverse sine, cosine, and tangent. Now, the inverse sine, cosine, and tangent is represented with the same little sin for sine, but it has a little -1 exponent and a -1 on the cosine and -1 on the tangent. It looks like an exponent, but it's not an exponent. We're not raising it to the -1 power. It's just the way mathematicians signify that we're doing the inverse sine. So for instance, if I wanted to solve this equation here, this cosine of some angle equals 1/2, if I do the inverse cosine, what it does is undoes that. So this cosine function and this inverse cosine cancel. So I took the inverse cosine of the left side to get x by itself. But what I do to the left side, I must also do to the right side. So since I took the inverse cosine of the left, I take the inverse cosine of the right, and I use a calculator. Make sure, again, your calculator's in degree mode. I take the inverse cosine of 1/2, and I find out that that angle measure, or x, was 60 degrees. Again, I can't emphasize enough, make sure your calculator's in degree mode. And basically, all of these are going to be just like that. If you need to rewind and write those down, please write those down. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just take the inverse sine of the square root of 3 over 2. And hopefully you can all use your calculator as well, know how to do that. So I'm just going to type that in very quickly. So I do the inverse sine of the square root of 3 divided by 2. And when I do that and I hit enter, I get also 60 degrees. That's a 60-degree angle. Now, I'll bet eventually some of these are going to be decimals, which is perfectly fine, but a lot of these will be integers because I see that when they use square roots of 3 and square roots of 2, they usually are integers, and your calculator will know that. Now, what happens when we get to a secant? There is no inverse secant on your calculator, so we're going to do it a little differently. So to do the secant, and the same thing will apply for the cosecant and the cotangent, what I do is I flip both of these upside down. So I write the secant of x as 1 over the secant x and 2 as 1 over 2. It's an equivalent equation. And then realizing that the secant of x is 1 over the cosine of x and vice versa, the cosine of x is equal to 1 over secant of x, I can replace this expression on the right here, or sorry, the left, this 1 over cosecant of x as the cosine of x. Now I use my calculator to do the inverse cosine of 1/2, and now tell me what my answer is. So basically, I do the reciprocal of this value, and I do the cosine, the inverse cosine. So again, I grab my calculator, and I do inverse cosine of not 2, but 1 over 2, and I get 60 degrees. So again, they're still giving us nice whole decimal values, which is fine. So again, with this one, what you're going to do is cosecant is related to the sine function. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the inverse sine on your calculator of this right side flipped upside down. So you're going to do it as 3 over 2 square roots of 3 on your calculator. So you grab your calculator, do shift inverse sine of 3 divided by, now make sure you do parentheses around that 2 times the square root of 3 to make sure it also divides by the square root of 3. And we get 60 degrees. Wow, they're throwing a lot of 60-degree angles in. But again, I'm hoping that makes sense, that when you get, I'm hoping we do a cotangent, this would be the inverse sine of 1/2, right? So you just flip that. Inverse sine of 1/2, I believe, is 30 degrees, by the way. Here's a cotangent. So I want you to realize that when I do the inverse tangent, because cotangent relates to the tangent, when I do the inverse cosine, I'm flipping this upside down. I'm actually doing 1 over 1 flipped upside down, which is still 1 over 1. So just because it's 1, don't think I didn't flip it. And by the way, the inverse tangent of 1, I believe, is a 45-degree angle. Some of these you'll actually get, 45, you'll get to know pretty quickly. Here's one more. Let's just do this last one. We'll be done. So again, I'm going to do the inverse tangent of 3 over the square root of 3, because I'm flipping the fraction and doing the inverse tangent. Inverse tangent of 3 divided by the square root of 3 gives me 60 degrees. They sure like 60 degrees. If you have any questions, please do bring them to class.